everyone, and welcome to today's instructional video. Today we're going to be talking about text types, forms, and genres. Now, we are doing this so that hopefully you will be able to identify characteristics of different forms and genres of text so that eventually you'll feel comfortable comparing and contrasting different forms and genres. Now, first, before we get too far in, I want to remind you to get your guided notes for this instructional video. This is an example of what they might look like depending on your class. If you are confused about which pair of guided notes to get, just let me know. I will help you in class. And remember that slide titles make really great cues, and the information on each slide is really meant for the notes column. And you can go as in-depth as you want. You can color code, you can go crazy. But remember that your guided notes are meant to be a resource for your big summative tests. So take solid notes. Now, there are 4 main text types. These are like categories that you could sort every piece of writing into. And they all have different purposes and sort of like different vibes. The first one, the one that you're probably the most familiar with at this point, is narrative and lyrical. Now, I kind of smush these two together and call them literary texts because they are literature. They are meant to entertain and express your emotions. Now, narratives, by the way, are just a fancy word for stories. They include characters and settings and plots and themes. Every short story, everything with a story in it, even video games, can be a narrative text. And lyrical texts are just focusing on conveying emotions and thoughts. Like Taylor Swift fans, every single one of her songs, every song ever, by the way, is a lyrical song, although some can be lyrical and narrative. Now, because that can get confusing, remember, I just call those literary texts. We also have expository text types. These are texts where the author is hoping to inform you or explain something to you. They include facts, they're organized logically, they have headings and subheadings and images and captions and graphs. These are things like articles and textbooks and reports, those informational texts. We also have technical writing. These are things that are meant to teach you how to do something. They'll include the steps of a process. A lot of times they'll also include command words like mix 8 pounds of sugar into 1 tablespoon of butter. Put the butter mixture into the oven. Think about instructions, recipes, how-to pieces. Those are all technical texts. They teach you a sort of technique. There is also persuasive texts. These are meant to persuade, but you never would have guessed that one. They include claims, evidence, reasoning. They try to get their reader to do something. They use formal language. Think ads, speeches, on demands. Now, to make your life a little bit easier, when it comes to that first category, remember, we can just call that literary text, those things that are literature, like poems and stories. And these expository texts, since they're meant to inform you, we can call those informational texts. These two, literary texts and informational texts, are the ones that we're going to work with the most this year. Now, when it comes to like the way we're going to break this down, I want you to think about text type as the least specific way we can describe a text. Saying this is an informational text doesn't give us a lot of information besides what it is meant to do. We can get even more specific by looking at the forms of a different text type. Each text type has their own forms. An article is a form of an informational text. And we'll get even more specific with genre, but we're not going to do that yet. So when we look at narrative and lyrical forms or literary forms, remember these are meant to entertain our reader and express our emotions. You're going to see novels as a form of a literary text. They are long, they have detailed complex plots, a lot of characters. You know what a novel is. We also have short stories. Now, these are similar to novels in that they'll tell a story, but they only have one plot and no like real big side stories and only a few characters. These are things where you could sit down and read them in one go, like 20 minutes. Examples include The Telltale Heart, The Lottery, Rikki Tikki Tavi. This book, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, I was obsessed with these when I was a kid, and then I would not be able to sleep for the rest of the night. These are just a collection of short stories. Now, dramas. These are narratives that are written to be performed by actors. This is another literary form. When we read plays, they have dialogue, stage directions, and are divided up into acts and scenes, but they are meant to be seen. Now, there are a lot of different ways these can look, but all of them will have the fact that a character talks. That's called dialogue. So there's a character, that's where they're talking. They'll have stage directions where like, this isn't for us to read aloud. Like if we were performing this as a class, we wouldn't read the teacher distributes the quiz result. We would just see that happen, or it's a note for the actor. Here's another way that they might look, and we can see character, dialogue, Stage directions. Millie is not going to say sarcastically. Millie is just going to say this in a way where the audience is like, oh, Millie's being sarcastic. Here's another way that this might look. This is a drama meant for a film series, right? This is meant to be actually filmed and put into a TV show. And you might actually know what show, that's the word, what show this is actually from. But you can see still we have character, dialogue, stage directions. This is what we see. It's not said out loud. Poetry is another literary text type because poetry is literature. This is one of those lyrical texts though. It's meant more for expressing feeling than for like entertaining and like giving a story. Now, poems are really easy to recognize because they have those line breaks. The line doesn't go all the way across the page, and they have stanzas. Different types of poetry have all their own different rules. You can see that these are all pretty different, but poetry is one of my favorites because this is actually where you can break some rules. You can see that in this E.E. Cummings poem. E.E. Cummings is not a big fan of rules. He does not capitalize like anything, and he doesn't include a lot of punctuation. But you can bet your butt that when E.E. Cummings wrote a letter, he included punctuation because he knows the rules. Here are different other narrative and lyrical texts, other literary forms that we could look at. Memoirs are a big one that we'll consider. Memoirs are sort of like when an author takes one of their memories and they write the story of it. Songs are a lyrical type, another literary form. Creative nonfiction is one of my husband's favorites, but now we're going to get even more specific. So different text types all have their own forms, different forms of different text types, but then those forms can also have genres. Hopefully this is familiar to you, but if it's not, stay with me. So you might read a novel, which is a literary text, but it could be a romance novel, or it could be a Western, or a horror novel, or a fairy tale novel, or a fantasy, or historical fiction, or science fiction, or 1,000 other different genres. When we look at that triangle again of like less specific to most specific, so you have your 4 text types: literary, informational, technical, persuasive. Each of those have different forms. So let's think about novels. And then novels can be sorted even more into different genres of novel. Like romance novels are not going to feel exactly the same as a Western novel, even though when you just like look at it as a book, it might look pretty similar because it's got paragraphs and everything. I have made this giant chart for you, and you may look at this and go, oh no, please no, Miss Johnson. But I have already given you most of the answers here. When you see these in your guided notes, this will be blank because I want you to kind of go through this. And if you want to go through this and talk about this with a partner, that's totally okay. But those genres all have different things that make them that genre, right? A horror genre isn't one where they're going to be like, oh, and by the way, everyone fell in love with each other and they kissed and they lived happily ever after. Because horror has a certain set of rules and traditions with it, right? It's spooky. It's supposed to be horrifying. I have listed out a lot of the different patterns and sort of rules and traditions around these genres, and I have left just a few blank. I want you to fill those in on your own. I want you to see what you can figure out with for patterns or what that genre needs in order to fit. That means your chart, when you are finished with it, should have every single box filled, even the blue boxes. Those are the ones left for you. But I'm going to move myself out of the way. That way you can take a peek at this and really stare at it if you need to. Genres, forms, text types, those can all be kind of hard to grasp. So if you need any help, come grab me in the room. That way you can get what you need. All right, that concludes this instructional video. Let me know if you need anything at all, my friends. I'm going to pop out of here now.